Today our case brings us to Passage West. It is a port town in County Cork, situated on the west bank of Cork Harbour, some 10 kilometres southeast of Cork City. It has a fantastic community of people with lots to do: soccer, GAA, golf and rowing clubs, men's shed and tidy towns, and the Greenway which leads to Cork City if you are into your walking and cycling. And of course you are right by the water, so it is a beautiful place to live. I am going to start this case by explaining the law of provocation and how it has been used in this case and others. This law was introduced through chivalry and the right to defend honour, but this was a time when violence or a duel was used to settle matters, and it was used to prevent a hanging at the outcome of someone losing their life, and they would instead go to prison. This law has not been changed since hanging was legal in Ireland. Ireland is the only common law jurisdiction which asks the jury to subjectively apply the defence, to ask whether the defendant, with all their idiosyncrasies, would feel provoked in the situation to kill. In other jurisdictions, such as the UK, it is applied objectively by asking the jury to consider whether a reasonable person would feel provoked. If the defendant can prove to the jury that they were subjectively provoked into homicide, the murder charge can reduce to manslaughter. It essentially allows a victim to be blamed for provoking their own death. Some legal experts say that the subjective element of the law makes it particularly difficult to explain to a jury, which can lead to verdicts being appealed and overturned. Justice Paul Carney once called the defence a graveyard for judges, because appeal courts so frequently overturn the verdict in provocation cases. When someone says, "I was provoked," the law as it stands in Ireland, unlike in the UK, says you must look into the defendant's mind and decide whether or not they were provoked. Whereas it should be that the jury, if they were in the same circumstances as the defendant, would they themselves be provoked as ordinary people? Members of the bar do still think there is a place for a law of provocation, but it should be objective rather than subjective, which you will see why in this case. Olivia Dunlea O'Brien was 36 years of age in the year 2013. She was separated from her husband Adrian, and together they had 3 children. Olivia lived in a new housing estate on Pembroke Crescent in Passage West with her 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and she also worked as a preschool teacher. Olivia's family moved to Ballinlough in the 80s, and Olivia was known to be a lovely pupil, sweet, diligent, and took part in everything in the school. She was the oldest of 3 girls. Her siblings were Amanda and Anne. They were a very close family, so much so that when Olivia got married and moved to Passage West, her sister Anne followed, but they were both still in reach of their home place in Ballinlough, which is only about a 15-minute drive away. At the end of 2012, Olivia began dating a man, Darren Murphy. He was from an area of Passage West called Dan Desmond Villas in Glenbrook. He was the same age as her, and Olivia had known him over the years before they started dating. She saw the relationship as casual. While she gave Darren plenty of her time, she had other priorities, like her children, work, and her commitments to the community. He, on the other hand, had a different view of what their relationship should be and made it known. The family didn't particularly like Darren, but they respected Olivia's choice and so tolerated him for her sake. But they did see red flags. They felt he was very possessive over Olivia. He was clung to her all the time. Wherever Olivia was, he would want to know. Even when she was visiting her mother and father, he'd ring her and then turn up at the door. He would follow her everywhere and park outside Olivia's house in the night time. Megan, Olivia's daughter, recalls when her mother had sat the 3 of them down and asked them would they be okay if she had a relationship with Darren. Not wanting to go against their mother, they said yes. You see, Megan would say he was always around. From being in their house, to their nanny's house, to their aunt's house, he was always there. They couldn't breathe. Darren didn't trust their relationship and didn't trust that Olivia wasn't seeing someone else on the side, which she wasn't. Darren's behaviour said more about who he was and not about who Olivia was. She was doing nothing wrong. On the 16th of February 2013, Olivia's sister Anne had given birth a couple of days before, and Olivia brought her and her baby home from the hospital that day. telling her when she dropped her off she'd see her the next morning first thing. That evening, Olivia had arranged to go out with Darren, and so she dropped her 3 children to her sister Amanda, who was staying at her parents' house in Ballinlough. She then headed back to her own house and was collected there by Darren in his car, and they both went to Rochestown Inn for a few drinks. At this stage, they were only going out together 6 to 8 weeks. After having a good night, they got a taxi back to Olivia's house, which was only a short distance away. The taxi driver would later say that Olivia was in great form, but that Darren was quiet and seemed a bit sulky. From here on in, we can only go by Darren's account of what happened and why it happened. He first said that when they arrived at the house, he left Olivia at the front door and went home to bed. At around 1 a.m, Anne received a missed call from Olivia, but when she phoned her back, her phone was off. Anne tried to ring her multiple times after this, and still there was no answer. So eventually Anne rang Darren's phone, and he picked up. He sounded panicked and told her that Olivia's house was on fire. Olivia's mother was staying with Anne that night in Passage West to help with the new baby, and had heard the fire engine sirens earlier, not knowing that they were for her daughter's house. When Anne arrived at Olivia's house, it was already up in flames, with fire burning through the roof. A crowd was already starting to gather, along with Gardaí and firemen. Anne spotted Darren in the crowd, and she immediately approached him angrily, knowing in her heart of hearts that he had something to do with the fire. She asked him, "What did you do?" Of course, Darren put on a dramatic performance, claiming he wanted to go into the house and find Olivia, crying and beating his fists in sorrow. When the fire was under control and it was safe to go into the house, the firemen searched for Olivia. They would find her on the bed, face down and badly burnt. The ceiling had fallen in on her. She was dead. At first it was thought that the fire was a terrible accident, that Olivia had fallen asleep in bed smoking and had died because of the fire. But Olivia's family never believed this. They knew that Darren had something to do with her death. The community of Passage West and Ballinlough were in shock when they heard of Olivia's passing. She was so well known in both places. Telling the children, though, was going to be the hardest thing. Sleeping in their beds, both grandparents woke them to say that their mammy was gone to heaven. The children had cried and screamed, knowing that they would never see their mam again. They could not be consoled. The life they knew would never be again. They were only 12, 10 and 9 years of age at the time. On the Sunday evening of the 17th of February, hours after the fire, Darren Murphy presented himself at the Garda station, happy to cooperate and help as much as he could with finding out what happened. The first thing he did was hand over the clothes he had been wearing the night before. But later, when Gardaí checked CCTV from outside the pub, they discovered they were not the clothes he had been wearing the night before. A search warrant was issued for Darren's house, and he was held for official questioning. Over the next few hours, Darren would tell Gardaí many a story, and like many cases, will never really know the truth of what happened. Through questioning, Darren admitted that the clothes he had handed in were not the clothes he was wearing, and that they would be found in the crawl space under the decking at his house, and the shoes he was wearing were in the attic. The knife he used was never recovered, but it had been taken from the knife block in Olivia's house. He also told Gardaí that both he and Olivia went by taxi back to her house. By now, they were both fighting. Olivia telling Darren that he was not welcome to stay at the house that night, that she undressed to get ready for a visit from an ex-boyfriend, that she had been in contact with him that same night, and this is what they had been fighting over. Gardaí would forensically examine Olivia's phone, and it would show that she was not in contact with any other man in the previous 8 months. He would say that he lost the plot, and at first he tried to smother her, face down in her pillow on the bed. He said he did this for 3 to 4 minutes. Gardaí asked Darren, did he say anything to Olivia as he did this, and he said no. They asked did Olivia say anything, and she had said at one point when he turned her head around, "What about my children?" He didn't answer her, but instead got a knife and stabbed her 6 times, leaving her paralysed. Gardaí asked why he set the house on fire. He said he didn't want the children turning up the next morning and finding their mother dead in bed. Forensics would establish the fire was started in the bedroom by setting fire to the duvet, and another fire was started in the kitchen. When Darren had set the house on fire, he left in Olivia's car, drove back to the pub and picked up his own car, throwing away the keys to Olivia's car in a nearby stream. When asked why he did this, he said he had seen it done in crime documentaries. When he left the pub, he did not go straight home. Instead, he drove up the road that overlooked the housing estate where Olivia's house was, to make sure her house was burning, with her inside being burnt alive. You see, Olivia was not dead at this stage, but paralysed. As the following days passed, with the family trying to come to terms with losing Olivia and trying to cope with the children's loss, the Gardaí investigation into the fire was progressing along, and with the state pathologist Dr. Mary Cassidy performing an autopsy on Olivia, a clearer picture was emerging of what had happened to her. The results of the post-mortem showed that Olivia had suffered 6 stab wounds, 4 to the back of her head and 2 to the back of her neck. Dr. Cassidy also found carbon monoxide in Olivia's lungs, revealing she was alive when the fire was started, but could not move as one of the stab wounds had left her paralysed. After Dr. Cassidy was finished her examination, Olivia's body was released to the family and a funeral was organised. They could not have an open coffin for obvious reasons, and this, as usual, was very hard on the family. People gathered from Ballinlough and Passage West to support the family and say their goodbyes to a woman that had a big impact on both communities. The Church of Our Lady of Lourdes was packed to capacity, and Olivia was given the send-off she deserved. 2 weeks later, Aaron, the eldest of the children, made his confirmation without his mother. By now, Darren Murphy had been officially arrested for the murder of Olivia. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter, but the DPP did not accept this, and so a trial date was set for May 2014, and he was remanded in custody. The trial was held in the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. It would be the first time the family would hear the details of how Olivia was murdered. The family found this very hard, and the way they spoke of Olivia was very matter of fact. As usual, the victim loses their identity, and it is all about the person on trial. Of course, Darren played the pitiful little man in front of the jury, with his head down or in his hands, looking all distressed and remorseful for the judge and jury. But as soon as they were out, he sat back in his seat, head up and staring down Olivia's family, not a bother on him and showing no remorse. His defence used the law of provocation, which I have explained already. He said that he completely, suddenly and temporarily lost control of himself, and that although he killed Olivia, it wasn't murder but manslaughter. The DPP put it to the jury that Darren Murphy did nothing to help Olivia. He could have called for help, but instead tried to cover his tracks by setting fire to the house, getting rid of the knife, and drove to where he could watch Olivia's house burn down. He was eventually found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He also received 6 years for arson, which was to run concurrently. But this would not be the end of it. After he was found guilty, Murphy appealed his conviction, and in February 2015 he won on the grounds that Justice Paul Carney failed to give proper instruction and explanation to the jury in what was expected of them when it came to the law of provocation and the definition of manslaughter and murder in the case. The verdict was overturned and a new trial was granted. The family were devastated. The family also found out that during the first year of his sentence he was released on compassionate grounds to go see a dying parent. Remember, at this stage he was a convicted murderer. In May 2017, Murphy got his second trial, and the jury could not come to a unanimous decision that he had murdered Olivia. They understood that he lost control of himself, but was it Olivia's fault? Did the blame lie with Murphy or Olivia? It says a lot about society that this is even a question. Because they couldn't come to a decision, a mistrial was declared, and so a third trial would be granted, and Murphy was held on continuous remand. The third trial was held at the Criminal Court of Justice in Cork. Murphy again used the defence of provocation, but was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison in 2018. He again appealed this sentence on the grounds of bad character evidence, which came from an ex-girlfriend of his who was witness for the prosecution. At the appeals court, the judges denied the appeal on the grounds that the defence had produced their own character witness, stating that Murphy was a kind, gentle giant, and so one testimony balanced out the other, and deemed the conviction as safe in 2020. For 7 years, the family and the state fought to keep Murphy behind bars, and Olivia's children grew up with all these trials going on. At first, they were only told what needed to be told, but as they got older and it being constantly front page news, the family had no choice but tell the children how their mother really died and who was responsible. But with the love and support of their close-knit family, they did not let how their mother died define them. In March 2025, Murphy, now 48, had his first pre-hearing to be considered for parole. His parole period falls under the old legislation of 12 years and not the new legislation of a minimum time served of 20 years before a person can apply for parole, which only came into effect in February of this year, 2025. The family got to attend the pre-hearing and to meet the parole board in person. They spoke on behalf of themselves and read out statements from each of Olivia's 3 children. The decision of this parole has not yet been determined. Olivia's children were only small when she died, but in 2025 they are all grown up. Her eldest child, Aaron, is now 24 and owns a pet shop. Her daughter, Megan, now 22, took after her mother and became a preschool teacher, and she has a little boy. And Dara, the youngest, now 21, is an apprentice. I think Olivia would be well proud of her 3 children, who would have turned 49 this year. The Dunlea family have stayed very public about their ordeal of losing Olivia, in the hope of change in the justice system, and to warn other people of the stalking and coercive control signs, in the hope that it will save another family from going through what they have gone through. 89% of women who were murdered in Ireland were murdered by a partner or an ex-partner or by someone they knew. Rest in peace, Olivia.